Welcome to the Next Pitch Podcast, hosted by Kate Love.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Next Pitch Podcast. Super excited about this one. We have Randy Wilkins, who is a incredible filmmaker and also Yankees fan/fan analyst. So he runs, he's part of Views from 314 Feet. Very insightful. Lucas and I said we could have talked to him for 10 hours and never stopped the conversation. So I think you guys will really, really enjoy this episode and you might learn a thing or two. Lucas, how's it going?
It's going well, Kate. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. He is a very knowledgeable person in the ins and outs and small nooks and crannies of baseball. The owner of the Pirates came up. He knew his name right off the top of his head. I had no idea.
Right. You and I had to Google that.
We did. Very insightful guy. A lot of interesting ideas I think that people will like. But before we jump into that, I know you spent a majority of the past couple of days watching Drive to Survive. It just came out, season 3. Tell me about it.
I did. You and I were talking about this before we started recording and I was crying, so I'm going to try not to do that again. But it was emotional. I thought it was tremendously done. I thought you had a better insight to Ferrari and Mercedes than maybe ever. Those are notoriously private teams. They covered the Roman Grosjean crash, which is what keeps making me cry. So the Bahrain crash, and you know this about me. I don't rewatch injury videos, and I get really, really mad when people, and particularly ESPN, just show these injury videos over and over again. I know it's this like morbid fascination with it, but when Grosjean crashed in Bahrain, I saw it happen. I saw like a short clip of it happening, but I hadn't really watched it. I knew enough. I knew the halo saved his life. I knew the car was split in two, but I don't think I understood the way it was split in two. So I thought it was split in two, like down the front towards the halo, which it wasn't. It was split in two behind him. So it was really hard to like watch the car be in two pieces. And it's just a reminder that, like, first off, it's a miracle he's alive. Definitely had angels sitting on his shoulder. Two, it's a testament to how far the safety of Formula One has come. Because if you watch the cars from the early 90s or even early 2000s to now, or without the development, the Halo came into play 4 years ago. I mean, he'd be dead. He would have been
Right.
decapitated, which is just horrifying. But I said this to you, and I'm going to get through this without getting emotional. But one of the things that got me is he was in the car for 2 minutes and 43 seconds before he came out of the fire. The car was on fire. And he said in an interview that for 2 minutes and 43 seconds, he was dead to his family. And
Wow.
that was not easy. And then the last episode did a really good job of touching on racial inequality and kind of Lewis Hamilton's story coming up through racing and the racism that he's faced from a young age to now, and kind of gives a lot, not that he needs that credibility to his fight, but lends another layer of storytelling to Lewis's fight for racial equality, equity. I hate when people say equality. That's not the right word. Racial equity in sports and STEM, and he's really forced Mercedes' hand to do a lot of work there. So it's just really cool to see someone use their skill to get there. So there's a lot of other really great moments, but overall, I thought season 3 was done really, really well, and it's probably the truest to the sport. So I really enjoyed it.
Definitely. I think something that we had talked about before recording, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he said something about being the extra pressure added when you're the first black man in anything.
Yeah,
Where there's
his
a
quote
whole
was something along the lines of like, to be the first black anything is an honorable but lonely walk.
right, and it's crazy to kind of think about when you're trying to perform at the highest level of anything, there's pressure, and it's obviously a very difficult task, and that's why there's only 20 drivers in the whole F1 circuit. But the fact that you now have a whole race is kind of putting their hopes of success for this sport on your shoulders. It's kind of like, hey, I got to be this sort of like gateway for the rest of my people to get into this sport, and it's so much pressure on someone that just adds to the severity, I think, of every little mistake or every little nuance of the sport. That's just incredible. It's incredible that anyone has to deal with that.
Yeah, he's been criticized, like, before I really got into Formula One, he was kind of criticized as like being a hothead, or he's like had these moments that weren't great, and he kind of got raked over the coals, and I thought he had this kind of like bad boy image, which now I wonder how much of that was racially
Hmm.
motivated. But I think it is telling how far the sport has to come that Lewis is a seven-time world champion, seven
Yeah.
time world champion. That's the most ever. And he is still the only black Formula One driver. There is a generation that hopefully is coming up that he is really making waves in, but I mean, yeah, he's out on an island there by himself, and in that same thread, something similar is what drew me to Randy. We talked about this with Randy, but he's just a really super thoughtful guy that comes across in the interview, but his Twitter is also tremendous.
It's A1.
Yeah, and he has these reflections on um race and society, and it's obvious that you see it through like a filmmaker's lens. It's obvious that he's a storyteller. It's obvious that his brain just works on this incredible level.
Yeah.
But I actually asked him, he's like a huge advocate for making space for minorities and women. And when I asked him about that, he says it's part of his identity. And that to me was just like the most profound answer. And it's something to me that I think I'll carry for a long time, that, when
Hmm.
I feel weird about speaking up to something, is that because something's lacking in my identity, or can this become such a part of my identity that it never feels strange?
Right, I think it was a cool like perspective of like I don't need to actively go out and fight for equality or fight for minorities to be treated equal. It's sort of like this is what is expected, and it's almost out of my mindset to think of it being a different way. Like why would I be anything else? Which was an awesome take that these people that deal with all this criticism shouldn't have to. And kind of speaking of criticism, as we know, March Madness is blown up. But did you see one of the Ohio State's players, the DMs he was getting? He missed like some free throws or something, and we something that we talk about a lot is athletes and the way that fans of their teams treat them when they do poorly and they feel like they own them and shut up and dribble or hey, you're so stupid for blah 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 whatever it may be. It's like they like almost objectify these athletes to the point where they're not people. And
They're
this
not people to
college,
fans.
yeah, they're not. But this college student that's probably 18 or 19 years old is getting death threats, people telling him to go kill himself because he missed a basketball shot.
I said this to you earlier. It's not uncommon, it's unbroadcast.
Yeah. And
And I
He.
think more athletes should speak up about that. And I think Twitter and Instagram and social media places need to really, we talk about this bullying, and people can hide behind these keyboards and just do whatever they want. And it's time for like social media gives you unfettered access to athletes, and that's great. It allows you to create a connection that hasn't been there ever before. It's an unprecedented thing. Alex Faust touched on it, that it's an
Hmm.
aspect of his job that broadcasters didn't have before, that you're expected to interact with fans. That's incredible. But it's time for these social media platforms to step up and protect these people too, because they are people with feelings and families. Like, I keep going back to that Roman Grosjean quote. I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head. For 2 minutes and 43 seconds, I was dead to my family. We forget. Like we have these moments that are so big, and they're like brought to the forefront, but those moments happen every single day on a smaller scale, and it just needs to change.
Hmm.
So
it does. I might pronounce his last name incorrectly, but the player from Ohio State was EJ Liddell, And something that he said in that thread that kind of stuck out to me was, I can handle these comments. I'm just trying to show you guys kind of a peek into what it's like. And that kind of resonated with me because usually the athletes that speak up are strong enough to where they can deal with it, and they're not afraid to kind of show the bullying that they're receiving. But some of these athletes that you don't know what's going on in their heads, and one person that might get some comment like that might be all they need to hear to, after missing a shot on a big stage and already be feeling down on yourself, to go do something they'll regret, whether that's alcohol related or drug related or even worse. So I think we just really need to be careful, I guess, with our word choices and how we treat people that are human beings just like us. But on a lighter note, my bracket's busted. I'm sure yours is too. There's
Everyone's
zero.
bracket is busted.
Yeah, there's zero perfect brackets left. That's no surprise. I went on
Ohio
here.
State took everyone out except for 100,000, right?
Yep, and then Illinois lost today.
Yeah, that was a big one.
So
Oklahoma State to the ship, baby.
Oklahoma State. I really got to stop predicting because I had the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, and I came on here and said San Diego State for March Madness, and we're out in the first round. So my bracket's done,
Every
but
time I have mentioned my school doing well in this tournament, and to be clear, we're recording this and we're about to tip off in 20 minutes, and I still don't care about basketball, but I do care about my school. A lot of pride there. I knock on wood, so I don't know if you guys can
definitely
hear that.
March Madness is crazy. That's why it's madness. But briefly transition to baseball. I know that you went to a couple games this weekend. I'm so jealous. What was that like?
I am sunburned from them. I told you I put sunblock on and I'm so upset. I'm still sunburned, but I am also liquid paper white for those of you who do not know me. It was fantastic. It was great just to be back at a ballpark. Great game. Oklahoma State was playing here in Lubbock this weekend against Texas Tech. There was a great game for us on Friday. We won. Yesterday we lost, and then today we tried to mount a ninth inning comeback, and it was close. It was close, but yeah, it was
Hey,
good.
either
It's just
way,
great to be back at a ballpark. Even
yeah.
with the losses, I think this last year has given me a lot of perspective. I'm sure a lot of people feel this way. I probably would have walked out of that stadium super grumpy a year ago if this was happening, or 2 years ago losing. I wouldn't have taken that well. But now I'm just like, damn, I got to be at a ballpark. I was out in the sunshine. There were games going on. I was eating sunflower seeds. How can you be
Hmm.
mad?
Definitely not taking games for granted anymore. But I know we have a lengthy but really good interview ahead of us. So do you want to jump into it, Kate?
Let's do it. Randy, welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, you have quite the accomplished resume. I did some research on you. You have 3 Emmys under your belt. You're a
Yeah.
director. You run an analysis account as a Yankees fan. You're all over the place. And so I tried to look back and figure out which thread went viral of yours that I followed you from. I can't figure out which one it is because you have so many ideas that I agree with. You're very outspoken, but I feel like you're outspoken in a way that like makes sense. Like you fight for things that are logical. You don't just like have these hot takes to have hot takes.
Yeah, I don't believe in hot takes. And I don't really believe in off the cuff emotional rants. I feel like if you're going to talk about something, you should have some sense of what you believe in and what your perspective is, and then explain it and defend it in an intelligent manner. I don't think that immediacy is always the best thing. Like if I'm writing a thread, I've thought about it. Um, and if I haven't, and I'm kind of just going off the cuff, I think I acknowledge that I'm doing that. Like if I'm watching a Yankees game, I just start reacting to moments in the game, then obviously, I'm
Right.
being emotional and in the moment and reactionary. But when it comes to, points of interest or conversation, I feel like it's important to make sure that you're thinking it through, that you're critically thinking through the process and doing it with the intent of either educating people or challenging people or looking to get to a point where you reach consensus where both sides can learn something from it. the thread that you're talking about that went viral last year is when I criticized Major League Baseball for taking 9 days to respond to George Floyd's murder. And
Okay.
the I wouldn't say hypocrisy because I think that that's unfair, but just the missing the point that baseball is anchored by systemic racism and not acknowledging what's happening in their own house and putting out this general statement about racism in America when uh, baseball, the sport, and Major League Baseball, the league, perpetuate systemic racism on a lot of levels. And I think that it was time to really be honest about what was going on. And as a former baseball player, I know what that was like firsthand. I've had
Right.
experiences along those lines, so I know that I'm not pulling this out of thin air. And I didn't write that thread to get any attention. I think I said it in the thread. It was really just to get some thoughts out and feelings about how I was perceiving everything, and then it just kind of took off. So it really was meant to just get out a feeling I had had for a long time, and I felt like that was the appropriate time to do so. And then it caught on, and then all of a sudden, all these people were paying attention to me.
That's awesome. And I feel like that translates. So you're a director. So you're involved in the film industry and storytelling. And I feel like you have to have a certain type of personality to really be successful in that field. And I think that's why people connect and resonate with you because you clearly have it. You know, I went back and watched some of your work. We're going to talk about it. I watched 86 to 32. I am not a boxing fan. I don't know the first thing about boxing. I want to be. Lucas apparently didn't tell me. I know it's not boxing, but MMA had like the best fight card of all time this past weekend. Didn't even give a girl a heads up. But the way you story tell is very authentic. And I feel like that comes through in your tweets as well, that you don't, like you said, you're not about hot takes. You don't go and look for the emotional point just to like get it out there and get a reaction. Like you storytell with a purpose. Would you say that's true or am I
Yeah, I think
missing the
that's true,
mark?
but I think that's true, but for me, it is actually embracing the emotional side of things and the human side of things. So I think being able to tell an emotional story with depth is hard to do, but I think
Mhm.
you have to go into it looking for those beats, like we call them beats. So those story beats have to go beyond the immediate. So with 86 to 32, which was about Roy Jones in the 1988 Olympics, the easy path is just basically regurgitating the moments of the circumstances and then just going
Right.
through it and rehashing it and asking what happened. But really, there are more emotional layers to it. How does Roy feel about what happened? What is his relationship with his father? How does that relationship come full circle? What does it mean to sacrifice so many things as a young man that 99% of the population can experience if they have access to experience it, versus this guy who gave everything up for this one moment and then something out of his hands takes place. So you find those emotional beats by going into the story willing to go there, and
Yeah.
willing to pursue them. And for me, that's important because as you said, you're not a boxing fan, but I wanted to tell a story that someone like you would engage with, because it's not just about boxing fans, it's about people connecting the stories. And ultimately there are a lot of similarities, or at least experiences that we've had that a lot of people can relate to. And I try to make my work and the things that I talk about as universal as possible while having a very specific focus. So again, with Roy Jones, boxing fans understand the circumstances, they know the ins and outs, they know the technical details of what is involved in it. But I don't want to just tell that story for them. I wanted to tell it for everybody. So
I'd
that's
agree. I
yeah.
I found a lot of depth in it myself. When he is talking about, so to give a backstory for people who haven't seen it, Roy Jones Jr. was fighting in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, and he was fighting in the gold medal match a South Korean. and shady stuff had happened already. Like the middleweight champion, like, or the middleweight favorite, got the wrong bus schedule because he was fighting a South Korean and was disqualified. So just very, very shady things happening. And which I think we see a lot in the IOC overall. So, as I'm a huge Olympics fan, but there were 5 judges. 3 of them voted for the South Korean, despite the fact that Roy Jones Jr. landed 86 punches in the South Korean park, right? Only landed 32. And of those judges, they were all suspended for 6 months, and then 2 were banned for life. But one of the things that Roy Jones Jr. said that really stuck with me is that he grew up in Florida and he never even went to Disney World because he was so focused on training. And I think about the sacrifices that I've made as an athlete, obviously not at that level. I was a swimmer. I had Olympic dreams at some point. My shoulders did not hold up for that. And honestly, it got to a point where my swim schedule would have been, in the pool at 4:30 in the morning and out for school, and then back in the pool at 5 p.m. at night, and then done at 7:30. And I cared more about being a good student at that point than sacrificing to swim. So one of the things that really jumped out at me that one of the people you interviewed said is that these judges ruined an athlete's dream. And it wasn't something like, it wasn't his performance. It was completely out of his hands. What is it like getting to tell that story?
I mean, when somebody says that, you know that you've kind of hit gold, because that's basically the film in one line. You know, that's
Right.
that's basically what you're attempting to convey to people. So when somebody can succinctly capture it in such a manner that is very straightforward and easy to digest, but also difficult to hear, then you know that you've kind of hit the jackpot. So I think for that film, we just had a lot of great stuff, and we couldn't use all of it because it was a short. But yeah, I mean, it was just, you know that you have it. Like when you interview somebody and they say something like that, you know that you have it. Like you can build the story around this, and you know that no matter what obstacles might be in the way in telling the story, you know that you have this one thing that you can kind of go to that will save you, or
Well, and
enhance what you have.
you told this story 28 years after it happened.
Yeah.
And those emotions are still very raw. Yeah, it's fantastic.
No,
Like I said, not a boxing fan, but I just know as an athlete sitting there, like trying to imagine things happening outside of my control, knowing what I've sacrificed is next to impossible. So,
yeah, it's I think at some point, if I remember, we did this a while ago. I think he cried at some point. Roy did. Because it's also, and I wish we could have gotten into this more. There were 2 things that I wish we could have talked about more in that film.
uh-huh.
One was the South Korean politics, like the Olympics. All the things that happened at the Olympics were more part of a larger geopolitical conversation that was happening at the time in South Korea.
Right.
And also getting more into Roy's relationship with his dad, because I think
Yeah.
that there was a sacrifice, but it was also this strained relationship with his dad. And I feel like he didn't say this, but I got the impression that, you know, if he had won the gold medal, it would have vindicated his choices of kind of stepping away from his dad. And he didn't
Gotcha.
get that chance, or at least he didn't have like that medal to show like, you know, I made the right choice in
Yeah.
choosing my own path. So
Well, and it's even more difficult because he went to Park and asked him and said, "Do you think you won the gold medal?" And Park said no.
right.
And then you're walking out of there and you're like, everybody in the world knows that that's mine, and a silver medal at the Olympics is nothing to hang your head at, but in this situation, it's
It's
harder
terrible.
to swallow than most. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not good.
I
mean,
can't even imagine.
neither can I. I mean, I would love to get a silver medal at the Olympics, but for that specific scenario, it's like a participation trophy.
Well,
Almost.
and then they even pour more salt in the wound because he won the Val Barker Award for
Right.
being the best boxer in the Olympics. And then they're like, and here's your silver.
Right. Yeah.
I just can't even imagine. So that was part of a series done with Spike Lee. And you also directed a show on Apple TV called Dear ... And you did the Spike Lee episode. So I'm assuming that you have a fairly good relationship with him.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've known him going on 18 years now. So actually a couple weeks ago, so I met him at my undergrad, Franklin and Marshall College. At that point, I was kind of like the filmmaker guy. I was
Yeah.
working at the school. I got into film late. I didn't get into film until I had to take an art class my senior year in college, and it was this video narrative course. And I only took the class because I needed an art credit to graduate on time. So that was the only art class that was open. I didn't know that you can make movies. I thought it was magic. Like I had no connection to film at that point. So fast forward a couple years later, the school hired me as a filmmaker in residence. So although I had graduated, I was still on campus. And Spike was a fellow for the school. So the school always brought in some leading figure in different industries to basically give full access to the campus community. So he gave lectures and went to classes, like he did the speaking stuff. He was all over the place for like 2 days. And I met him at the welcome dinner. And the president of the college gave up his seat so I could sit next to Spike. So we
Oh,
hit it
wow.
off. We had an argument right away about Pat Burrell, Pat the Bat, and then it went from there. So eventually he gave me a recommendation for NYU Film School, and then I started working for him, and I was an assistant editor for a long time, and then I ended up being one of his editors. So I have like a long relationship with Spike. Spike, there are two people that basically molded my filmmaking path, and one is Spike and one is Mary Haverstick, who is the professor in that course that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I've known Spike for a long time. He obviously like a huge influence on me, and yeah, I mean, he and Mary basically changed my life. So it was to do Deer and be the one in charge of his story was very weird and unexpected. He didn't know that I was directing it. Like we were working on a Jackie Robinson commercial, and he walked into the edit room. I was editing the commercial, and he comes in, and then I go, are you doing this thing with Apple? Like, are you doing some show with Apple? And at first he didn't know what I was talking about. And I was like, isn't Apple doing a show that's like focusing on you and you have to like shoot when you go to LA and all this other stuff? And he was like, yeah. And he's looking at me like, how would I know that? Why do I know that? And I was like, oh, well, I'm directing the episode. Like, I'm directing you. And he looked at me and he was confused for a second. And then he just started laughing and walked out of the room. So that was that. And then he came back a little while longer. And then he asked me if I was being serious. And I was like, yeah, like I'm directing.
How else would you know? Right.
Right. So he laughed again, and then he was like, okay, cool. And then, he was excited to do it. But yeah, it was weird to have the tables turned for once and have him on the other side of the camera. And I got to be the one in charge for a couple minutes. So that was cool.
So what did you think you were going to do with your life before? Because now, like just having a glimpse into your persona from Twitter and just having this conversation with you right now, I can't imagine you doing anything else.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, I couldn't see me doing anything else either. But I guess before that film class, well, I had to try out with the Kansas City Royals right before that semester.
Okay.
So, I mean, I wasn't going to play in the major leagues, but at that time, you have the opportunity, you do well, and you're like, oh, my dream of playing baseball could happen. And then I tore my ACL, and that was basically it. And I just quit baseball altogether after that. But at that time, I felt like I could play professionally. I mean, I did not think I was going to be a major leaguer. Like I wasn't that good. I was a good athlete, and I earned that tryout. But looking back on it, I mean, there were people way more talented than me in baseball. But the other thing, I guess, was kind of just like go to law school and figure out what I was going to be while I was in law school. I think if I was a little younger and kind of like the information revolution in baseball had taken place either when I was in college or I went to college later, I would have pursued that. Like that was the thing I probably would have gone into because I would have realized that there were other avenues to get into sports rather than just playing it. So it kind of would have been the equivalent of taking that film class. It would have been something else, probably on the internet or Twitter or whatever, to let me
Right.
know that there were viable paths to be a part of the sport without having to actually participate on the athletic side of it. Um, so I could have been like a sports agent, but I wasn't really into that. Like I don't really care about that much. So I'm not sure. I mean, things happen for a reason. So I'm doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing. That's how I look
Right.
at it. So
Yeah, that's our biggest goal with this podcast is to show people that there are other avenues into sports because I mean, I got super lucky. I kind of fell into the analytics side. I got really sick in college and I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I wanted to fix elbows. And then somebody that I know very well while I was having a pity party one night because it is hard when you feel like your life, I'm sure with the ACL, you felt like your life had just derailed all of a sudden. It's so difficult to be like, okay, this is what I thought I was going to do for my whole life. And now I'm in the middle of college and it's like med school just was not a viable option. I would not have made it through with as ill as I was. And he was like, instead of fixing elbows, why don't you just prevent them from getting hurt? And it was like a light bulb went off.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I was really fortunate in the time where this revolution was taking place and good timing. But
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's what the film class was for me. I mean, I honestly thought that making movies was this magical thing that only famous directors had access to. And up until that time, that was probably true just because of the cost of equipment and, um, you know, there was digital filmmaking, so it was more accessible to everyday people. That's when I was in that class, it was turning into that. So to have access to make films opened up this world to me, and within 5 minutes of the first class, I knew that that's what I was good at. I mean,
yeah,
immediately. So the light bulb went off for me, and thankfully it wasn't something that I wanted to do when I was a kid because I was very naive in thinking that it was easy to just get into the industry. And I felt like I had some talent and it was just going to be very easy. And I went
yeah.
to NYU and like the best film school in the world, and all these doors were going to open up. And then the longer you're in it, you realize that you're wrong, that it's a very long process to get to where you want to be. But because I got into it so late, I just had like a love and passion for it. And it was just like, I'm willing to deal with all this crap because my expectations were in playing baseball, and I
Right.
put too much pressure on myself playing baseball. And I realized I wasn't going to do that with film. I was just going to go for the ride. And I was very fortunate to be with somebody like Spike, where I had access to things and was a part of projects that a lot of people in film didn't have access to. So I was already in a fortunate spot right from jump. And it was like, I'm not going to complain too much because I'm in a great situation and things will turn out the way I want them to as long as I'm patient and persevere through things.
I feel like that's a perfect marriage too because he's such a sports junkie. He really loves sports and you do too. You you're the only other person I follow on Twitter that tweets about as many sports as I think I do. Like you're super into soccer, or at least you know enough about soccer to like talk about it. I like Australian rules football. I don't think very many people here actually care about it.
I know nothing about that.
They have the best mullets in the whole world. I will tell you that. Like it
Nice.
is it's like rugby on I don't know. It's so fun. I still don't understand all of it. I went to Oklahoma State and my friend's
Mhm.
brother is like the only American playing in the AFL.
Oh,
So
okay.
the games are like in the middle of the night. I'm always texting Nolan and I'm like, what is happening? I don't understand what this rule is. But then if I talk to anyone else, I'm like, I've got a total grasp on the game. Like we know
Yeah.
it's I'm
Yeah.
trying. So I'm assuming baseball is your favorite sport because you played it.
Yeah, even if I didn't play it, it would be my favorite sport. I just think
Sport.
baseball is the best sport, period. I mean, by far. Like, I don't
Yeah.
really think that there's much that comes close to it, to be quite honest.
Very fair. I like that answer. I love
Yeah.
baseball, but I feel like you've got to have the mind for it, and you've got to like understand the game. I think a lot of people think that it's very surface level, and like if you really understand the ins and outs of baseball, there's never a dull second because people are always like, "Oh, you got to wait for every pitch," and I'm like, I'm pitch sequencing.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
brain is always going.
Yeah, it's to me, it's the only sport that something is happening literally every second of the game. Like,
Yeah.
football is totally dependent on these like structured systems, and nothing happens until the action starts. Basketball, I mean, there's constant movement, so it feels like something is always happening, but
It's
it
happening.
feels like there's only a certain amount of outcomes that can come out of basketball, and there's such a finite space in basketball. I'm not sure that it's the same as baseball. Um, Soccer, I feel like something's always happening, but it doesn't have that moment to moment strategy. It's like
Right.
keep the shape and then react to what's happening. And I feel like hockey's the same way. Baseball, there's some, like you said, there's something happening with even with pitch sequencing. Like, one thing sets you up for the next. Like, somebody's always thinking, you don't know where the ball's going, positioning. I mean, there's always something happening. So, yeah, I think it's the most active sport, even though it doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
You know,
I One of the things that I appreciate about baseball, and we'll get into this with the Yankees, is that I don't enjoy basketball. I used to enjoy basketball a lot. I mean, I grew up in Houston. I was like in my formative years when the Rockets were dominating everything, and Hakeem Olajuwon like lived pretty close to my parents, so he was just like this god walking amongst mere mortals. And I played basketball growing up because I'm tall, so it's just a natural fit. But they started making these super teams, and then like the Nets just got Blake Griffin, and now it's like, well, shit, it's not competitive anymore. And I feel like in baseball, even when you create these like semi super teams, like you could argue the Yankees are a super team, you could argue the Dodgers are a super team, you could argue that the Padres are a super team right now. It's still Garrett Cole still has to go out and have his stuff. Like if he goes out and has a bad start, like that's it. You know, Stanton still has to go out and hit the ball, which he does sometimes. Judge still has to go out and hit the ball, like even when you put these super teams together in baseball, it still all has to be on or it can go sideways so fast. And I just feel like that's almost the only team where that is, or the only sport where that's true, you know?
yeah, there's something about basketball that feels boring to me now,
Hmm.
and I don't know if it's
That
like
you can
I'm
predict every score.
right. I mean, but even within the game itself, like I find myself kind of getting bored or thinking about other things while watching a basketball game. And I'm a Bulls fan, but I love the Warriors. Like, I love the Dynasty Warriors because you could see that they were changing the game in real time. But
Right.
I think now, because people were copycats of their style, which was unique to them because of their personnel, it just feels like they're all doing the same thing and they can't do it and they're all not as good at it. And like certain things that made basketball like really endearing and romantic are out of the game. Like, nobody really dunks anymore. Um, it feels like the athleticism, while still there, isn't as an emphasis as much
Right.
now. It's like, I can shoot. I mean, if I take enough shots, I can be a better shooter, but I can't dunk. I'm not like a super athlete, and I feel like the big game moments, especially like you bring up the Nets, like someone like James Harden. He's amazing. He's an amazing playmaker. Like, he's great, but like
It's a
part of his
sore
game.
subject for
I'm
Houstonians.
sorry. I'm sorry. But like part of his game is just getting to the line. There's too
Hmm.
much like efficiency and like focus on that stuff that oddly baseball is always criticized for, but I think it's made basketball worse than it's harmed baseball. Like, if you compare the two sports, I feel like the whole emphasis on efficiency in basketball is actually taken away from the sport more than numbers and analytics has impacted baseball. Like, just in terms of like the on-field product, I think analytics has impacted the business of baseball, but like
Right.
the actual sport, it feels like it's impacted basketball more. Like even with the dunk with Anthony Edwards, like there was a controversy that came out of that because, you know, Nate Duncan was talking about efficiency on his shooting. Like, who cares? He just
Yeah.
banged it on somebody. Like, that's why we're watching the game. I can't bang it on somebody like that. I never will be able to do that. I could, again, if I took like 30 shots, I'll hit most of the shots, but that doesn't make me unique.
I would just say that it's almost flipped where basketball used to be the flashy, the guy, you know, Allen Iverson crossing someone over, someone throwing down a windmill, and baseball was sort of by the books. And now it's almost switching where baseball, you have these young guys that are encouraged to bat flip and, you know, make jump throws across the infield. Maybe we just need to go back to little Reggie Miller, Spike Lee talking at the garden to get it more exciting.
They need to be for something. Yeah, I mean, it's totally like, yeah, it's almost as if baseball is allowed to be more athletic now. Like that's more of an emphasis. You know, like throwing 100 miles per hour takes incredible athleticism. Like not everybody can do that. And basketball is just like, you know, shoot the three. You know,
Right.
Okay, cool, but
I think that's a really good point that I like hadn't thought about, because if you think of like basketball's progression, basketball players have always been incredibly athletic. We cannot say the same of baseball players. Baseball players in the 80s were doing some very questionable shit in the clubhouse. There might have been drugs involved. There were definitely beer involved. Players just didn't take care of themselves. And now we've seen baseball really come around where players like care what they put into their body, and they're playing longer and they're extending everything. And I don't know if it's just that like basketball was kind of ahead of its time in that point, but now you're right. It feels like the athleticism in basketball is gone. And I mean, it's there. You can tell, like you look at them and you're like, LeBron James is an athletic guy.
Right.
But yeah, it's just not fun for me anymore. I don't enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, even with LeBron, I mean, this is not to take anything away from him because I know it's popular to do that, but he shouldn't be the only guy flashing athleticism in basketball. Like we shouldn't continue to marvel that he can still dunk. And I think part of it is because he takes great care of his body, but also because he's actually willing to dunk. Right. You know, like he'll still do it. There's a lot of people that just don't. And it's just, you know, I don't know. I think like it's taken away from the overall sport in many ways.
We need more players to have Kobe's mentality out there and just be ruthless. I do want to talk about the Yankees, but I wanted to touch, you did something really cool with Pepsi this year with the bodegas and giving back during a year that was really difficult. Kind of tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, I had actually bid for another spot with Pepsi that it didn't work out. But I had left a pretty strong impression on them, and they had this bodega campaign for the holidays, and they wanted to give back to the community, and specifically we're targeting neighborhoods in the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. I still live in the Bronx. So immediately it was something that I connected to and thought was really important. And we went through this long casting process of finding a bodega that was still around during the pandemic and had like a heartwarming story that people could connect with. And we landed upon Juan in the South Bronx, and we had Jesus and Mero, the Bodega Boys. I mean, it was just like a natural fit talking about bodegas and to have those guys be a part of it. And we gifted them with a year's rent, or Pepsi did. I don't have enough money to pay somebody's rent like that. But yeah, Pepsi gave them a gift of paying a year's rent for the store. But again, it was about finding that human story. And Juan lost his father to COVID early on in the pandemic, and he didn't give himself enough time to grieve because he felt such a strong responsibility to the community that he was serving with his store, that he was gone for a couple of days, and then he came back because he knew that the community needed essential supplies. This was when everything was really bad in New York, like when we were the epicenter of the pandemic. So he put his own personal tragedy to the side to make sure that his community was taken care of. And we really wanted to dig into that because, again, it's about connecting people. Like it's funny because the Pepsi spot came out a couple weeks after that stupid bodega beef on Twitter. And I feel like it came at the right time to kind of settle that silly debate. that these are like community institutions. It's not like a Wawa where you just go in there and you get a Pepsi and then you leave. Like these are actual like institutions that people rely upon in the community. It's more than just like a store. So yeah, I think it was important to tell that story. I was really proud to tell that story. It did really well and made a lot of people cry, which was good. So yeah, I'm really proud of it.
Always pulling emotion out of people. I feel I'm obviously not from New York and we don't have anything similar in Texas. Texas is so spread out, but I feel like people in New York really do form these relationships with the bodegas that they frequent, that they know the owners, they know each other. It's a part of your life. So that's a really cool story to get to tell. The other thing that you do really well and that I appreciate as a woman in sports is that you advocate regularly for the inclusion of minorities and women in spaces where maybe we're not always invited. You also, I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. You also on Twitter go by Pam's son, which I'm guessing your mom is Pam.
Yep.
So I think that you have like a really healthy respect for women in general. Um, let's talk about your mom's influence, that why that's so, I mean, obviously it's important to you. Why is it so important to you? And
I don't know. It's kind of hard to answer that question just because it's a part of my identity. Like my parents are divorced. I still talk to my dad. I know where my dad is, not like one of those stories.
right.
But I was basically raised by my mom, my grandmother, and my sister. So I've just been around women who hold me accountable, who are open with their experiences, their feelings, who are very intelligent, are trailblazers. They all work in education, which is a big thing. My grandmother was a teacher for 40 years. My sister works in the school. My mom was both a teacher and administrator in schools. So they were always a part of the community and uplifting others and just set really strong examples for me to follow. And and they also were very demanding. Even my sister's younger than me, but we all have very high expectations for each other. And it doesn't necessarily mean like professionally, it means as a person, how you treat people, the respect you show, being good to people. Those are our expectations in my family. So I wasn't really around many male figures to influence the way that I look at things. So for me, it's not even a thing about fighting for equality. It's just expected, and that's how I go about things. Like I don't go into things thinking because you're a woman or you're trans or you're Asian or you're this or you're that like the expectations or the ability to get something done is any different. So for me, it's very straightforward. This is what it is. These are expectations, and either you, the individual, is going to satisfy them and be a good person, or you're not. It's not because of, obviously things influence the way you look at the world and everything. But I also don't feel like there's any detraction from it. Like the expectation is still the same. So, but I don't think a lot of people share that view. So I feel like it's important to speak on it and support people who are marginalized or aren't represented as well to make sure that point gets across. So
That's awesome. Tell your mom thank you. And it does make me feel better to know that strong women who influenced you like that are involved in education, because that means they're influencing multiple generations of people. And I hope that that sticks with a lot more people, because honestly, we could use a lot more yous in the world, a lot more people with your outlook. Just like I said, everything you say comes across as so authentic and just real.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's very rare to find in today's social media climate.
Yeah, no, I know. I see a lot of nonsense that I either laugh at or just like curse at to myself. So
I do a couple of those a day. Okay, so you run views from 314 feet. Yes,
with with 2 or 3 other guys, not just me. I can't take all the credit. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But so you're a huge Yankees fan. You grew up a Yankees fan, I'm assuming.
Yep.
I also grew up a Yankees fan. I shared that with you earlier. Derek Jeter is the reason I love baseball. I practiced that jump throw in my backyard until my right arm almost fell. My when I played softball, I would get so mad because I was always the tallest person on the team. So they're always like, giant, first base,
Right.
first base. And my mom was my coach, and I would be like, I want to play shortstop. And so she would stick me there like every once in a blue moon, and I would get so excited. And I wanted to wear the jersey number 2, but I couldn't because the jersey links get longer as the numbers go up. So I always had to be like number 5.
Oh gosh, Lou.
And
Yeah.
I was destroyed as a child that I couldn't wear number 2. But so you're into analytics. We kind of talked about that. You really enjoy it.
Yeah.
How did you get into analytics? Was it just like a natural progression as the game went that way, or?
Yeah, it was partly a natural progression. It was partly access, when things became more available to people.
Right.
Partly just a general intellectual curiosity of why players perform the way that they do or what's kind of under the hood. I will say I don't think I'm the most analytically inclined. I feel like there are people that just go down a rabbit hole, and that is just like too deep for me. Like I think that there's some things that like our eyes still have to inform.
Right.
And I'm not like I was good at math, but I hated math. So like when you get to a certain point with numbers, like my brain just shuts off. Like I think that's just like the more like
where you're like, I just want no part of this.
Yeah. Like we're going too deep. But yeah, I mean, it was really just another way to learn the game and understand why things are happening. And I think it was a slow progression. I think places like River Ave Blues had a big impact because it was smart writing and that was analytically based about the Yankees. So I think it caught more of my attention through that. And then,
Right.
like BP and all those other outlets, I caught on after, but it was really River Ave Blues that made it accessible, but also something that I could understand right away. And then I think whatever hesitations I had about understanding it kind of went away because it was explained in a way where I can grasp it and then kind of jump into it. So yeah, I mean, that was basically how I arrived at it.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Yankees were one of the first teams to really start to spend money on analytics. I think with the Yankees and Dodgers, I know the Red Sox, it was weird. The Red Sox were doing a lot with analytics, and then all of a sudden they just like stepped way back from it. And then the
Red
Yankees
Sox
were
are
like,
weird.
we're all in on it.
Yeah.
I also told you this before that I really, really like the Rays, which causes some tension here. But
Yeah.
you just made the point that like you have to like trust your eyes. Like there's still parts of the game, and listen to a podcast yesterday with Tyler Glasnow where he kind of said the same thing about analytics, because of course what's going to keep getting beat into the ground until we start playing again is Kevin Cash's decision to pull Blake Snell in the 6th inning of the World Series at a game that I was in attendance at, and sitting in the stands with my hands over my head like, what are we doing? And then Snell also like wrote the piece for the Players Tribune where he said that what really got in his head was that he looked out and Anderson was warming up in the bullpen, and he was like, they're gonna pull me, they're gonna pull me. And what was interesting is Glasnow said that Snell had been pulled in the 6th inning, like he hadn't gone past the 6th all year. So he kind of felt like it was like not that big of a surprise. But that's where analytics gets tricky, is when you stop trusting your eyes.
Yeah, and also this is something that I feel like I feel a need to write about or talk about at some point. That there are two things with analytics that are really starting to bother me. And I think I mentioned it earlier just about the business of analytics.
Right.
I think a lot of the labor issues we have now and distrust is sown in analytics. Like the league has turned into like a hedge fund company across the board, which also leads into my other issue with this is that analytics is in many ways, we were talking about basketball kind of stripping athleticism away from the game. I think analytics has stripped competitiveness out of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that that example with Snell, it's not even your eyes. Is really we're trying to win. Like
Right.
Blake Snell is putting us in a position to win this World Series game, and that's what I'm going to go with because it's the best competitive decision, not
Right.
because because the odds say this or this is the way that we've done things. And I think there are too many situations now, and that's even like a problem at times I have with the Yankees, that it's a decision rooted in a process that doesn't value competitiveness as much as it should. And there's no way that it can, because it's literally numbers and data. Doesn't know what competitive
Yeah, there's not a formula to.
Yeah. So I think the Snell example is great because the competitive side of me just naturally says he's shutting them down. We need to win this game. Forget the process. He's doing it. Like he's doing what we set up our entire operation to do. And they gave more trust to the process than the person. So
Yeah, what's even weirder to me is that, like, from the analytics standpoint with Snell, is that the next 3 hitters that were coming up don't do well against lefties. And I'm like, and then you pull them and you put a righty in. It was my sister and I, yeah, that you've like worn out throughout the entire World Series. My sister and I actually ended up at that game because we got stuck in Dallas on a layover. So we were trying to get home from Portland, and Lubbock was completely iced over. Like, we could not get here. And when it became very clear we weren't getting home, we were like, we're going to Game 6 of the World Series. Like, you can't be there and not go.
Right.
But my poor sister, when Cash started walking out, and of course, so this is my complaint. The new ballpark in Arlington takes my least favorite aspects of new Yankee Stadium and my least favorite aspects of Minute Maid Park, and then like married them.
Okay.
So it is not my favorite ballpark, but you cannot see the bullpens most places in the stadium. So
really?
I didn't even have an idea that Anderson was up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like you have to be like in the front row behind the bullpens to know that someone's up in the bullpen, like from almost anywhere except for dead out across down the first base line.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea that Anderson was even up. So Cash comes walking out, and I'm just like, what are we doing? What is happening?
Yeah.
I mean, it's win or go home. And I'm like, Blake Snell's arm has got to fall off before he comes out.
Yeah.
And if you pull him out, then I'm putting Tyler Glasnow back out. I don't know who I'm throwing out there, but I'm not putting Anderson.
Right. Yeah.
So.
No, I have to admit, though, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the decision. I thoroughly enjoyed the outcome. I'm all for seeing the Rays not win a World Series in a weird season. I'm all for them having replica American League trophy giveaways at their games this year instead of a World Series trophy replica giveaway.
And probably every fan that comes gets one. They do not have great attendance, but no, last year, it's wild to me because like the Rays Yankees rivalry to me has gotten, obviously the Rays or the Yankees Red Sox rivalry is always going to be like a thing, but I feel like the Yankees Rays rivalry is chippier right now.
Oh yeah. No, it's real. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
I can't stand the Rays. Like the 2 teams I can't stand right now are the Rays and the Astros. Like, and I think, not to take anything away from the Rays, but I think that they were built for like that weird season because they were so dependent upon their bullpen. Like if it was 162 games, like their arms would have fallen off. So I give them credit. Like they took advantage. I think that they were built to beat the Yankees matchup wise. So I think that they did the right thing. I'm just curious how that's going to play out over a full season. Like I just, I don't know how they can pull that off, not just against the Yankees, but in general. Like,
they're going to have to start letting their arms go deeper into games.
Yeah.
Because like there were times last year they were pulling starters in the 4th and 5th inning at pitch counts that just like didn't make sense. But last year we did get to see Cole versus Glasnow 3 times, and I don't know how that worked out, but it was fantastic.
No, it was good. It was good. I like Glasnow. I mean, he is one guy that I appreciate watching him pitch and all that stuff. So there is one guy on the Rays that I like. It's probably him. Everybody else I could care less about to be quite honest.
That's fair. There's a lot of changeover this year. I'm excited Chris Archer's back. I'm excited to see how that plays out. But yeah, you talk about athleticism, and that's arguably the most athletic pitcher in the league.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
very few people move that efficiently. This season's predictions, I saw where you don't think anyone can get close to the Yankees in the AL.
Not this year.
Not this year.
Not this
Okay,
year, no.
who do you think's the only team that can give them a run for their money?
Not the White Sox?
See, okay, so a couple people brought up the White Sox, and I would say yes, but I think that they have holes that a lot of people just for whatever reason are not talking about. Like Adam Eaton should not be their right fielder. Like
Yeah.
I feel like their lineup isn't that deep. And I think they still have they could add to their bullpen. I'm also not, there's also just like a natural, and this might be like arrogance to whatever, but I mean, if you're from the Central, nah. I just
No,
don't pay. I mean,
I'm
come
kind
on.
of the same way. I keep saying, so I'm gonna have to say this here because I've said it multiple times already. I think that the only two divisions that are going to be super interesting to watch this year are the AL East and the NL West. You have no concerns like about the Rays and the Blue Jays. Like,
Nah.
yeah, maybe they won't beat the Yankees all the time, but they're gonna be tough to consistently beat. You don't think so?
You mean head to head?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they're gonna like run through those two teams, but I mean, Toronto's pitching is just like what. I mean, if we're assuming that the Yankees are healthy,
Yeah.
I mean,
which has been a big if in recent years.
That's the if. Like to me, the only team that could beat the Yankees in the AL are the Yankees, just like health wise. But
that's fair.
I just don't see how Toronto can keep up with the Yankees. A full line. I mean, like Clint Frazier might be their 8th hitter, and he could put up all-star numbers. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like I think Toronto has a great offense. It's just their pitching, and then the Rays are going to win games because they're the Rays. Like they just figure out ways to like do that Rays thing. They get some like broken bat game-winning hit after like shutting down your lineup for 8 innings, and then they get like some random guy like hits a walk-off, and you're like, I've never heard of this guy until this game.
Brett Phillips last year in the World Series.
Yeah, it's just like the backup catcher guy. He killed the Yankees last year. I don't even know his name. Like the Rays are going to beat the Yankees a couple times just because of that weird Rays thing. But just like overall, this is the one year where it's hard for me to find somebody that matches the Yankees. I feel like the competition really to argue who's as good as the Yankees or the Yankees as good as X team are in the National League. I don't think that they're in the American League. Like
the Dodgers and the Padres.
And I mean, I like the Mets. I like the Braves too. I just think overall, like put the Yankees to the side, the NL is the better league than the American League this year. I just think that they have multiple teams that are better than the other non-Yankees teams in the American League. So it's hard. It's hard. I'm trying. I kept thinking about Chicago, and I know Tim Anderson said what he said, but I don't know. It's hard. I just can't. There's something about the NL. I mean, I'm sorry, the AL Central that I'm just like I can't take you seriously. Like
I got you. It's just to have Nick Madrigal as your 9 hitter. That guy does not strike out. He might hit 280. And
Gary Sanchez might be a 9 hitter.
I know the Yankees are really good. I'm just saying this would be a good matchup.
Are you a White Sox
Gary
fan?
Sanchez is the.
I train a couple guys on the White Sox. So
okay. All right.
I just like good baseball.
Yeah.
I grew up a Giants fan, so I don't have a lot of room to talk in recent years. But
yeah, but you have 3 titles though.
We do, but it's starting to get, the last 5 years or so have been a bit iffy.
Yeah. I think they're going to be sneaky good, the Giants this year. I think
so do I like them.
Yeah. So we know a bunch of guys on their pitching staff, like both players and in the development side, and they've got arguably like the best staff that I've seen, just the way they think. So I think they're going to surprise a lot of people this year, but they're also getting real old, and the Giants are like real to their old players. And I'm like, man, at some point you guys shut the door.
Yeah, I think they're going to be better than expected, but the fact that they're got to play the Padres and the Dodgers, they're not coming out of that division. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Can you imagine too when they get to San Francisco and the ball flies? It's just
yeah. So do you think that the White Sox are better than the Twins?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
A to Z, I would say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Tim Anderson, Moncado, Jose
Lucas is
Abreu,
being really nice. Lucas
Grandal.
Giolito trains at his facility, and
I would.
he's gonna look
Yeah.
real good this year.
He's looking
I mean,
good.
I would love Giolito on the Yankees. That's for sure. So, you know.
Yeah.
Don't you have enough? Do you got to keep grabbing all of the talent?
Well, according to Yankees Twitter, no, we have like a terrible rotation. I mean, apparently we have like terrible pitchers. I mean, everybody's hurt and they're not good. And I mean, that's like one thing, honestly, like as a Yankees fan, that's like tough to deal with. And
Is
when
that you guys are very dramatic as a fan base?
yeah, and like I think actually starting the site like really opened my eyes to that. I know that Yankees fans have a certain reputation and like we're spoiled and all that stuff. And that is true, but it's worse than I thought.
Yeah.
Just because like looking at how they respond to player moves and how the team goes about constructing a roster, it's almost like toxic in some ways.
Yeah.
And I always find myself having to defend the team as if I work for them. And it's like, Jameson Taillon's really good. Corey Kluber's
Yeah.
really good. I mean, the only issue is health. And I feel like that's a universal issue for every team. I mean,
Right.
you work at Driveline to prevent injuries. That's not a Yankee thing. That's an athletic thing. Like people get hurt. So
Well, and I just think like Jameson Taillon getting out of like Pittsburgh, which
Yeah.
is not known for the health of their pitchers.
yeah.
He has a chance to be really special. He's from the Houston area,
Mhm.
so I've seen him play since high school. Like, people need to appreciate that you have Jameson Taillon and that
Yeah.
you got him for what you got him for.
Right. I'm all. I think he's going to be the number 2 starter by the end of the year. I mean, I'm all in on him, but it's people will just go for the low hanging fruit and talk about the Tommy John surgeries, and it's like, well, he revamped his body and his mechanics. I mean, that means something. Like he's
Right.
a different. He's literally a different pitcher now. So we have to see how it plays out in games. You can't just assume that the same outcomes are going to keep popping up. If he's made a change, we don't know what's going to happen. So,
Well, the other thing that's really shitty about Tommy John is like some arms are just going to blow no matter what. Like some
Mhm.
arms are not meant to throw 95.
Mhm.
And then once they have the replacement, but we don't know unless you put every pitcher through an MRI, and agents are never going to agree to that. It's just not
Right.
going to happen. So
Right.
I think that the average baseball fan, like I used to be like this, like Tommy John would happen, I'd be like, oh no. And you like freak out, but then you really start to research and you realize that like there's anatomically normal arms and then there's anatomically abnormal arms that you don't know were wrong until something blows,
Right. Right.
So fans are, it's hard to get people off the like panic defense. I saw you tweeting defending Britain today, telling people
Yeah.
to
I
take a
mean,
deep breath.
he had COVID. I
Right.
mean, we're living in a pandemic. He had COVID, I think, like in like around the holiday season. So he's not going to be throwing bullpens with COVID, and now
Yeah.
he's in spring training trying to catch up. The same thing happened to Clark Schmidt. I mean, he tried to throw 98 coming out of the gate and he got hurt. But
Right.
we can't assume that, there's context, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, that not every single time somebody says that they have to get an MRI that the worst is going to happen. I mean, we have to think about the larger context of what's going on. And I just feel like, especially with Yankees fans and injuries, and I understand why, because it's been a ridiculous run. But sometimes, it's not as bad as you think and people will recover. And, you have smart people there that know the body better than we do, and we should trust them.
Right. And I think people also don't realize that pitchers' MRIs rarely come back completely clean. Like wear and tear is a thing. We
Right.
expect to see fraying in the shoulder. We expect, they're doing something that's super unnatural to the body. So I think sometimes it's like, oh, this doesn't look perfectly clean, so we're going to shut him down for 2 weeks, and people just immediately start running in circles like their hair's on fire
Yeah.
when it's just normal.
Yeah, I agree.
Fun question for you. So I don't know now. I don't know if you're the one who tweeted this, but I saw this on the Views from 314 Feet Twitter.
Yeah.
What if you were a GM and you had 280
Oh.
characters to tweet? Was that you?
No, that was Matt. That's the teacher out of the squad. That's Matt. Matt gets up early because he teaches, so he's like bored, I guess, and then he starts like tweeting stuff out like 6 a.m. East Coast time.
I know. I told everyone the other day, I was like, I'm back on baseball schedule, so don't call me before 10 a.m.
Right.
I don't exist.
Right.
We're lucky if it's before 11, but I really like that tweet. So the premise was that you have 280 characters of a tweet. You're the GM. You can change anything that fits in those 280 characters tomorrow. No questions asked. What would you do? Or not the GM, you're the commissioner of baseball. So what would you do? What would you change?
I have a lot of thoughts, but the one that caught my eye that I think falls in line with what I was thinking was I guess it's twofold, that you change the arbitration to like 3 years of service, and then you institute a restricted free agency period. So instead of doing the whole 6 years thing, you're a restricted free agent after 3 years, and that you have a little bit more control of where you can be. And I think that it can be like a hybrid of like NBA and NFL restricted free agency. I mean, there's a lot of issues with RFA in other sports, and I think that you can take the good pieces, but I think that that's one thing to like really address. I mean, the arbitration system service time thing is ridiculous and antiquated and exploitive. Like, it's all of those things. So yeah, that's the one that stood out to me the most that I agree with.
Service time's a real sticking point for me because there are guys that literally we've had sent down and you're like, oh, if he stays down 18 days and they get a whole nother year, and sure enough, day 19, they call him up and you're like, how is this a thing?
Yeah, it's bad.
I wrote down mine.
Okay.
So I have to see if you agree with them. Universal DH.
Yes.
I don't understand why we're making pitchers hit. It's just
terrible.
It's not fun. It kills the
horrible.
game.
It's horrible.
It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
One of the answers I saw that I really liked was no blackouts. Because
that was the other one. That was the
also drives me nuts.
Yeah, the blackout thing is horrible.
How do you expect to like grow the game if people can't watch the games? It was really bad in Houston because the Astros signed like a terrible TV deal there for a while, and like no one was carrying it. So like literally 10% of Houston was able to like see the Astros games at any given point. And then this was also like right around the time they stopped sucking. So instead of spending $10 to go to a game, you're spending like $110 to go to a game.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was, you used to be able to buy a nosebleed ticket to the Astros and walk in and sit anywhere you wanted in the stadium because no one was there.
Nice.
And
nice.
I'm talking like 2014. I'm not talking
years and
years ago. Yeah, it was bad. So I was like, why would you sign a TV deal that things just don't make sense? I would market players.
On the blackout, sorry. The Dodgers deal was ridiculous. Like, they're the Dodgers and nobody saw them in LA, which makes absolutely no sense.
None.
And I've learned from people on Twitter that there are like certain pockets in the Midwest where they can't see any team. Like, they can't see the Brewers, the Cardinals, the Cubs, the White Sox, the Royals. Like, they basically can't see like the central teams because they might live in like certain parts of Iowa or like Kansas. Like,
so
it's
they
weird.
Just went ahead and wiped everything.
Yeah, it just wiped it out. Like, if you're in certain regions.
Texas is completely blacked out. Like, the entire state of Texas, 30 million people cannot watch either the Astros or the Rangers on like MLB TV. They black them both out. Yeah.
And like the largest state in the union besides California, which makes no sense.
I'm like, what are we doing? And the Rangers are awful. You would think that you want, like, if people want to watch them, let them watch them. Okay.
Right.
How their GM, I know his name, I was going to say it, I'm just going to not, still has a job. I don't know. I want a team to be that loyal to me because well, I guess he's not their GM anymore. They just hired
He's their
one, but
president. Yeah.
yeah, so he got a
He got a
promotion.
promotion. A promotion for,
You
I'll say,
completely run this team into the ground, but here, we're going to move you up. And then they hired a brilliant GM. So
yeah, no,
insane.
I've talked about their president a couple of times. I don't know how he has a job, and he's from New York.
I literally thought this year, well, and him and AJ Preller were roommates at Cornell.
Yeah.
And like, then you're like, so Preller was doing weird shit over in San Diego. And like, he's like super into like, I always joke that he like collects Latin players, like their baseball cards. Like that was
Yeah.
his MO as a GM for a long time, was just like Latin player, Latin player, Latin player. And then all of a sudden I swear the Padres owners are getting ready to sell the team because they're just like spend all of the money.
Right.
And that just makes no sense to me. Great ballpark, beautiful city. Don't know where they got all the spending money from, but we'll go with it.
Yeah.
In the same blackout thread, market your players. Just spend some money putting their faces places. I don't know.
Agree. Yeah, I've worked with MLB marketing and their team, and it feels complicated because their team absolutely is aware of it, wants to do it, and really wants to like push certain people. They have somebody who's dedicated to players specifically, and is like a player liaison between the marketing department and the players. And they're a great team and really smart and like want to do it. But let's just say that they're not the full decision makers.
We got that same. So we had Rob Friedman, who runs Pitching Ninja, on, and I've known Rob 5 years, and he said the same thing, that like MLB wants to do it, but it just seems like they can't figure it out. And I don't know. So I'll say it. You don't have to say it because I don't work with them. Move the marketing department out from underneath the commissioner. Don't let the commissioner have anything to do with marketing the players. Let him run the game like he should be. And these are the two. I have 2 more points. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on each of them. I think that we should make a compound substance for pitchers legal across the board.
If it's regulated, you mean, right?
Yeah. Like the same compound substance on every mound. And my thought process is, I actually did a lot of research on this. I went all the way to asking a friend who plays fiddle in a country band here about rosin on his bow. And I said, when you play outdoors somewhere like Lubbock, which is essentially the desert, we have very little humidity here. I was like, how much rosin do you use? And he's like, oh, like none. Like I'll swipe my bow once and then like I won't touch it for the rest of the show. And then they play for an hour and a half. And I said, what about in Houston? And he said, constantly. If I make it through one song without needing, like by the end of the song, I'm like reaching for the rosin, which makes sense because we know guys in Arizona have to mix rosin with something. Everyone's doing it anyways.
Right.
And I think in certain climates where there's no humidity, like Arizona, like Colorado, that rosin actually makes the ball more dangerous.
Right.
And I just don't want guys to get hit in the head. So yes, I would make a regulated compound substance legal because I think it's safer.
Yeah, no, if it as long as it's regulated, I'm totally with you. And it has to be something that like is appropriate for all climates so that you know, people are safe. I mean, I know, like I followed the whole Bauer thing, like trying to prove a point and saying I could do this, I could do that if I really wanted to, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, it made me think about how prevalent it is, but also how like dangerous it could be if somebody, this is like you said, like in Arizona, and doesn't really control it. You know what I mean? Or like when it's cold here in New York, it actually is like pretty dry out. So like, if you remember with Michael Pineda against the Red Sox, when he had like all that pine tar on his neck and all that stuff, I mean, he was kind of protecting the Red Sox. Because, I mean, it was like in April and I remember that game. Like I was there, it was freezing. So, you know, I mean, I'm totally with you. I mean, there's like a safety element to it that people have to consider.
Yeah. I have a friend who, actually plays for the Blue Jays, but we were in Seattle watching, and his like best friend from a team that they'd previously been on together, they got to face each other. He's a reliever.
Mhm.
And when they faced each other, we were so excited. We were like, oh my gosh, like this is the first time they're like squaring off. First pitch is 97 at his head. And like after the game, like not on purpose, after the
Right.
game, he came up to him and he was like, dude, I'm sorry, it just got away from me. He was like, I'm not throwing 97 at your head, like with any intention. It was just this like big, I mean, I knew before that, but that was a big wake up call. When you watch like one of your closest friends almost get their
Yeah.
head taken off, you're like, okay,
Right.
maybe
Right.
we should do something. Because same thing in Seattle, when it's cold there, it's dry.
Yeah. It's very
So-
dry here when it gets cold. A lot of people don't know that about New York, but New York has like very odd climates,
Mhm.
depending on the season. So yeah, no, I'm totally down for that. That makes sense.
And then my last thing, and I think you'll agree with this one, is that if an umpire is under 95% accuracy, they don't get to call balls and strikes until they've done 3 sim games at 95% accuracy.
All for it.
It would fix Angel Hernandez
Yeah.
tomorrow.
See, like, okay, this is also something that doesn't get talked about enough, and I've noticed it, I think, since 2019. The quality of home plate umpiring, like outside of Angel Hernandez, he's terrible. Like he's him and
He's
CB
so
Buckner,
bad.
and CB
Oh,
Buckner,
CB
like
Buckner.
the worst, like the all time. But
There,
the overall,
CB called one of the Cole. I think he called one of the Cole Glasnow games, and I was like, "Do not
horrible.
ruin this for me. Do
But he
not."
did. But he did. I remember
Yeah.
he was terrible. I mean, both sides were like pissed off. He's
Yeah.
terrible. He shouldn't get playoff games. But the quality of home plate umpiring has fell off a cliff since like 2019, 2018. It's something that's like noticeable from game to game now. And the strike zones are so inconsistent and so all over the place that it's impacting the games. I mean, it's impacting the quality of the games, it's impacting performance, and it's noticeable on TV. I mean, it's some of this stuff is like it needs to be addressed. I don't know. I've had like a major issue with like the strike zones the last couple of years.
Well, they have no accountability, and I do not want to go to robot umpires. Like,
Yeah, I don't
I
either.
like the human element of the game, but they have no accountability, and it affects careers. Like
Yeah.
in arbitration, every strikeout matters.
Right.
It does. Like your team will be like, well, you only got 199 strikeouts, and that 200 strikeouts worth another $1 million. It's just, oh, umpires drive me nuts.
Also, just think like it impacts the integrity of the game.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of situations where pitchers are throwing strikes and they're not called. And then it's almost as if like the next pitch they give up a big hit. Or like even with the going back to the Cole Glasnow game, I remember one inning where Cole got a strikeout. It was a strike and he didn't get it. And then like they scored a couple of hitters later. And I remember the Yankees getting a couple walks because Glasnow didn't get the call and there were obvious strikes. You know, it's just like,
and that's what's hard too, because like when you look at someone like, I keep going back to Glasnow because he's just like the easiest example, but okay, Garrett has 4 pitches, right? Like that he can throw at any time. Glasnow has essentially 2. Sure, he throws a changeup occasionally. I think he throws it like literally less than 8% of the time. So we're not really going to count that as a pitch that he's throwing. When you are a 2-pitch pitcher and you have this big hard curveball that if it gets called for a strike, the majority of the time is going to be because someone's swinging at it.
right.
But if your fastballs aren't getting called for strikes and they are, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And that happened last year several times where it's like you're throwing it and you see it's a strike and it takes all the confidence. I mean, it does. It ruins an entire game.
Yeah. I've actually tweeted about it like multiple times. I just and I'm not even saying it from a Yankees fan perspective. I'm just saying across the board. Like it's just bad. And that's something that for whatever reason has not really been addressed or has not been a focus. Even in that spring training game with Angel Hernandez, I don't remember who was playing. Oh, it was Jack Flaherty. He threw a fastball right down the middle. For somebody like Jack Flaherty who didn't have the year that he expected to have last year,
Right.
and you want to like get off to a good foot and like get some consistency back or whatever it is, and you throw a fastball literally down the middle, and the umpire's just looking at you like you have three heads, and everybody's
Yeah.
looking back at you like you had three heads because you didn't do your job. I mean, it shouldn't happen. I mean, I know umpiring's hard, but like they're trained, you know,
Right.
they're also
It's
trained to do their
hard,
job.
but I also try and think of like any other job where you could not be 95% efficient and get away with it.
Yeah.
Like it is a difficult job. I've made a rule for myself to shut my mouth at umpires in the stands. I had an experience at a minor league game that was delayed after a rain out, and there were like 30 people in the stands, and an umpire actually turned around and looked at me, and I was like, we're gonna stop
Yeah.
doing that out loud. So I mutter a lot under my breath, and I am concerned about like whether their family is around me at any given point. If they have
Right.
children, I don't want their kids to hear me saying these things. I'm cognizant of that with most players. I say most, there are exceptions. Um, but yeah, it's just they have zero accountability, and I don't know how baseball's gotten to that point. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. Yeah. No, I'm with you with all of those suggestions. I mean, for me too. I mean, I'm like extreme. Like I would get rid of the draft. I would get rid of arbitration. I would just make it a true free market. I mean,
okay,
I don't work in an industry that drafts me for a job.
that's fair.
No,
Yeah,
like
you work in a true free market.
yeah, that if somebody wants my services, they reach out and like we negotiate on something. And I just feel like, and this is across all sports. I just think it's exploitive by nature. And for me, I would want that entire system blown up and just make it a free market. I mean, you're talking about like how many industries where you can get away with being less than 95% efficient. I don't know many jobs where you're drafted into a position. I mean, there are
Right,
college students that can determine their own paths, and they might
right,
not even be as talented as an athlete is in his or her sport, and they don't have any control over their own destiny, and even like where they end up. I mean, they can't even pick the city that they play in or the organization that they play in. And it could be, I mean, the two of you know way better than I do. It just might not be a fit. They
oh,
like the
for sure.
talent and it doesn't mesh.
Yeah, you have so many guys that come back and say like, well, I could have made I used this example previously that I have a friend who just got married and her husband, we were talking at dinner one night and he was like, I really felt like I could have made it, but I didn't get the chance. He like made it to AAA and then the team just like cut him.
Mm-hmm.
And my best friend and I went home and pulled up his own videos, and it was the simplest fix, like a very minor tweak to his mechanics that would have made a huge difference. And you look at his pitching profile and you're like, wow, they really just did not utilize him
Yeah.
correctly. So, in that token, I think it would also force organizations to be more responsible than they are. Like what the Angels do are borderline criminal.
Mm.
um, but also just like teams like, you wouldn't have players go to like shitty organizations.
Yeah. I mean, to not have the ability to even determine who your employer is absurd to me. And it's something I've never understood. And I've never grasped why that isn't challenged. I mean, I,
Right.
I know that a lot of the emphasis is on the actual like salary component of it, but it's just as important to be in the right place.
Right.
I mean, you brought up an example, and there are a million stories like that where you're just in an organization that doesn't support you or values other players over others for a
Right.
myriad of reasons, but you have somebody that's talented that could actually help out the organization, and they just get dropped, and it wasn't even their choice to begin with. There are no interviews. The interviews are
Right.
one-sided. It's not, the player can't interview the organization. If I walk into a job interview, I can speak to a producer and ask them questions and figure out if this is a fit for me as well. Like, are we aligned on how we're going to tell the story? A player can't do that. In
Right.
many ways, if they ask questions, they might be looked at as, then they get this reputation that's completely unfair. It's just, It's
Yeah.
exploitive. Like I'm very much into the whole blow this thing up and make it an actual free market.
Or the entire so I was just thinking while you were saying that Jamison Tyon's a perfect example. Garrett Cole, Tyler Glasnow, Charlie
Yeah,
Morton, we're all with the Pirates, all
right.
four of them. And I think we're going to see, you and I said this earlier, I think Tyon's going to have a great year. Uh, Cole has obviously, I mean, he was great with the Pirates, but he's obviously just blossomed since.
Right.
Same with the other two. It's just,
Yeah, I mean, look at Charlie Morton. I mean,
yeah,
Charlie Morton turned into like this other person basically on the mound as soon as he left Pittsburgh. And it's
yeah,
just like also, I think it's important for players to be in organizations where they actually want to compete. Like
right,
if you don't want to compete, you shouldn't get good players. You're willingly saying that you want to sit these years out. So if you're the Pirates who clearly don't want to compete, they just want to exist. If I'm in a free market and I'm a talented player, I'm not going to consider you. Like,
right.
why would I do that? It's a dead end. So if I'm somebody like Garrett Cole with that talent, I'm not going to go to the Pirates. Like he wouldn't have gone to the Pirates.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm sure he was sitting there on draft day. Like at some point you've got to think like, wow, I'm the best overall pitcher in this draft, and I'm going to the worst possible team.
yeah.
Like that whole system is very antiquated.
I'm also curious too, like with the draft, since there is a draft, why the worst team always gets the top
The
pick.
best pick.
Yeah, reverse it. If you win,
The best team get the best pick.
yeah. Well, I mean, to me, like winning is a reflection of an organization hitting.
Right.
So like, why aren't the successful franchises rewarded? Like the
Yeah.
Dodgers shouldn't have to figure out all these like ways to get better if they're successful. Same
Right.
thing with the Yankees. The Astros are different because they're different. But
Oh, Houston.
yeah, but I mean, to me, success should be rewarded. And the way the system is now is it's the reverse or it's the inverse. And
Right.
I also don't know what the thinking is behind that either, because you look at a team like the Pirates, they've had multiple number one picks, they've had great talent, and they willingly don't want to engage on a competitive level. They just don't
Right.
want to. So why do they have the privilege of giving a
I
top
do
pick?
have to say that the Pirates have replaced a lot of their like front office staff, and they are like moving towards a different culture than we've seen in the past decade. So I do hope that it gets better, because we are just like shitting on the Pirates right now.
But
They
the
deserve it.
but the
But
owner's the owner. Like I live in New York.
yeah,
So the best example is, now I'm not a Knicks fan, but James Dolan.
yeah,
The owner's still the owner. He sets the culture.
right.
So
That's
you
fair.
can, I mean, Dolan is going through 5, 6, 7 people. There's still the Knicks. Like Knicks
Yeah,
fans are excited they're at 500 because they haven't been at 500 for years, because it's in a net franchise because of the owner. It's the same thing with the Pirates. Like, yes, you have smart people in there and you want to change the culture, but the owner told the GM to trade Tyon.
right.
So not
That's
much,
fair.
I'm not sure much has changed yet, at least.
I guess I haven't thought about that the owner sets the culture. I mean, I'm a huge Mark Cuban fan, so I should think that, because I just don't think that there's a better owner in sports than that guy. But
I always think about it because I live in New York and I know about James Dolan. And I
yeah,
know how toxic a bad owner can be on a franchise and a fan base, and how much it can get in the way of success. So if you're willingly trying to avoid being competitive for like selfish personal owner reasons, you shouldn't be rewarded. And the draft constantly rewards
words
people.
who
Yeah.
are selfish like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, what, it's Nutting, right? Bob Nutting. He's the
Is
owner.
the Pirates owner?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, I think it's Nutting, but whoever that person is, he's rewarded. And I don't know why, like, I just don't understand how you can get access to the top talent in the country, but you stink, and then we know that in a couple of years you're not going to keep that player because you don't want
You're
to.
just going to trade them away.
Yeah,
but you're going to trade them away before they have the option to like make their own decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And that player is more than likely not going to enjoy team success because you will not surround those players with other good players to be competitive. Let the Dodgers get the first pick. They won.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. I do. Randy, we enjoyed you more than anything. You're my favorite follow on Twitter. It's not close.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So tell everyone where they can find you.
I'm on Twitter at Pamson, PAMSSON, and some of my work is on pamson.com. And yeah, that's where you can find me. Also, views from 314feet.com. If you like the Yankees, and we have a Twitter account at the same name.
Abolish the draft. Wow.
Mind-blowing. I don't think it could ever happen. I like the concept of it. It's actually, I know we keep talking about Formula One, but it's weird because Formula One is slowly moving towards a draft, like not like a draft like system, but they're putting more regulations in place to kind of even out things, and like how bad you finish is like how many days you get in the wind tunnel and how many days you get to do all this stuff. So it's kind of funny to see another sport like move that direction. But yeah, in baseball, I understand it. When you have shitty organizations keep picking top picks and they can't do anything about it, and then they just trade them, and these guys have truly no choice on where they go, and it can be a life-altering experience, a career-ending experience in some cases. It's pretty crazy. We kind of talk about that next week on the podcast with our friend of the pod, Tyler Ferguson, Vanderbilt national champion pitcher, drafted by Texas Rangers. We're not saying they're a bad org. We're just saying that he had the yips and maybe he didn't have all the resources he could have used. But Tyler was super honest with us about it, gave great insight, and coming off of a week like this one, just talking about mental health, talking about the realness of an athlete, just super appreciative that he was so open with his experience with us.
Yeah, Tyler definitely has been through a lot as an athlete, and excited to get into that episode next week. Before we go, just some final thoughts from this episode with Randy. He has so many great opinions, and just from the draft perspective, I never thought about any of that. Like, that was just something I just accepted, right? It's just how things were. Oh, the last place team gets the first pick, and it's a 40-round draft, and that's just how it goes. But it would be interesting to see kind of how things changed and how these organizations that, like the Pirates or teams that have done not so well over the last 10 years and aren't really putting these athletes in the best position to succeed, how they would change their ways if they were forced to actually negotiate.
If their hand was actually forced, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would change a lot. I think we see athletes slowly trying to force it that direction, but guys, tweet us and tell us what you would do if you were the MLB commissioner. Would you abolish the draft? What would you do? I would do I talked about it, but I'd do I feel like the stuff I would do is really straightforward and not controversial, but I don't know. Most people don't like the compound substance idea.
I think it's necessary. But yeah, I'm interested to see what the people at home have to say, because there could definitely be a better way to do it. That's for sure.
Guys, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, tell all your friends, download the podcast on their phones. We'll see you next week.